In James 5 verse 17, speaking of the prophet Elijah, the man who called fire down from heaven, who stood alone against 450 prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel, who outran a chariot on foot, James says. Elijah was a man just like us. Not a superhuman, not a spiritual giant. A man, just like us. And if that is true of Elijah, what does it mean for Moses? Moses, who stood before the most powerful ruler on earth and refused to back down. Moses, who stretched a shepherd's staff over the Red Sea and watched the waters divide. Moses, who climbed a mountain wrapped in fire and thunder and returned carrying the law of God carved in stone. Who was this man? Moses was not a spiritual giant. He was just like us. His greatness was not built on his own strength, but on the ruins of it. 120 years of Moses' life teach us something. He lived his first 40 years thinking he was somebody. Moses was born in a season of death. Pharaoh had issued a decree. Every Hebrew male infant was to be thrown into the Nile River. In that dark moment, one mother, Jochebed, made a desperate act of faith. She placed her son in a waterproofed basket and set him into the river's reeds. And Pharaoh's own daughter found him. The boy who should have died became a prince of Egypt. Exodus 2 verse 10 tells us that when he grew older, he became the son of Pharaoh's daughter. And Acts 7 verse 22 expands on what that meant. Moses was educated in all the wisdom of the Egyptians and was powerful in speech and action. In the 2nd millennium BC, Egypt was the most sophisticated civilization on earth. Its architecture, its military strategy, its administrative systems, its religious philosophy, nothing came close. Moses would have studied hieroglyphics, statecraft, and military command. He would have worn fine linen, eaten at royal tables, and been addressed with the honorifics of Egyptian royalty. He was, by any measure, somebody. One day, Moses went out to see his own people, the Hebrew slaves. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew man. Something rose in him: anger, justice. And then he killed the Egyptian and buried him in the sand. He was trying to be a deliverer, but he was doing it on his own terms, in his own strength, by his own methods. When Pharaoh heard what he had done, Moses fled. He left the palace, the power, the prestige, and ran into the wilderness. Moses came to the land of Midian, a dry, remote region beyond the Sinai Peninsula. Somebody became nobody, and he spent his 40 years thinking he was nobody. He sat down by a well. There he met the daughters of Jethro, a priest of Midian, and helped them draw water. Eventually, Moses married Jethro's daughter Zipporah and became a shepherd. From the palace of the most powerful empire on earth to the wilderness of Midian. From the robes of an Egyptian prince to the rough clothing of a nomadic herdsman. From power and prestige to obscurity to silence to watching sheep under the desert sky. He named his son Gershom, which means I have become an alien in a foreign land. That name is a window into Moses' soul. He felt displaced, forgotten, out of place. And this went on for 40 years. During this time, something was being stripped away from Moses. Not his gifts, not his intelligence, not his leadership capacity. What was being stripped away was his confidence. Is there anyone who feels like a nobody? Don't be discouraged, don't be frustrated, and don't give up, because Moses had another 40 years. The wilderness was not punishment. It was the time of preparation. One day, Moses led his flock to the far side of the wilderness, near a mountain called Horeb. And he saw something strange. A bush was on fire, but the bush was not burning up. Moses said, "I will go over and see this strange sight." And from inside the fire, God called his name. "Moses, Moses." And Moses said, "Here I am." God said, "I have seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people out of Egypt." Moses pushed back. "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh? What if they do not believe me? I am slow of speech and tongue." The man once described as powerful in both speech and action now says, "I cannot speak." I believe this is the mark of a man who has been genuinely humbled, because Moses has learned something the first Moses never knew, that he is nobody. For the last 40 years, Moses lived, observing what God could do with nobody. Moses went, and through him, God did extraordinary things. 10 plagues fell on Egypt. The Nile turned to blood. Darkness covered the land. And then the final devastating plague that broke the Pharaoh and opened the door. With all of Israel behind him, men, women, children, the elderly, Moses led a nation out of 400 years of slavery. But then they came to the edge of the Red Sea. Behind them, Pharaoh had changed his mind. His army was coming. In front of them, water. No way forward. No way back. The people panicked, and Moses, the man who once said, "I cannot speak," stood before terrified people and said, "Do not be afraid. Stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still." Then he stretched his staff over the sea, and God split the water. The one who stretched the staff was still nobody, but God split the water. The only thing Moses did was stretch his staff over the sea. The crossing of the sea was not the end of the journey. It was the beginning of 40 years in the wilderness. At Marah, 3 days into the desert, the water they found was bitter, undrinkable. The people grumbled. Moses cried out to God. God showed him a piece of wood. Moses threw it into the water, and the water became sweet. Throwing a piece of wood. That is all he did. God changed the bitter water into sweet water. When the people hungered, God sent manna, thin wafers of bread that appeared on the ground with the morning dew, and he sent quail in the evening. Moses did not produce the food. He announced the provision and stepped back. At Rephidim, there was no water again. The people were furious. They were ready to stone Moses. God said, "Strike the rock with your staff." Moses struck it. Water poured out of solid rock in the middle of the desert. Then the Amalekites attacked Israel. Joshua led the fighting on the plain below, but Moses climbed a hill above the battlefield with the staff of God in his hands. As long as Moses held up his hands, Israel was winning. When his arms grew tired and fell, Amalek prevailed. So Aaron stood on one side, and Hur on the other. And they held up Moses' arms until sunset, and Israel won. The most powerful servant of God in his generation could not hold up his own arms. He needed 2 men beside him to sustain him. This is not a portrait of weakness. This is a portrait of how God's work is always done, in community, in dependence, in the honest acknowledgement that none of us can sustain the battle alone. Even Moses needed Aaron and Hur. Then came Sinai, the mountain of God, wrapped in fire and cloud and thunder. Moses climbed into the fire and received the 10 Commandments, the moral foundation of a covenant people. But while he was on the mountain, something terrible happened at the base. The people grew impatient. They pressured Aaron to make a golden calf, and they worshipped it. When Moses came down and saw what had happened, God said to him, "Stand aside. I am going to destroy these people and start over with you." Moses stood before God and interceded for the very people who had just committed spiritual adultery. He prayed, "Please forgive their sin, but if not, then blot me out of the book you have written." Moses was willing to be erased from the story, rather than let his people be erased. That is what 40 years in the Midian wilderness had made, a man who would lay down his place for the sake of others. And God relented. When Moses came down from the mountain the second time, carrying the new tablets, his face was shining with such radiance that the people were afraid to come near him. He had spent 40 days and 40 nights in the presence of God, and the glory of it was written on his skin. But then came the moment where Moses himself stumbled. At Meribah, late in the wilderness years, the people were thirsty again. Again, they quarreled. Again, they complained. God told Moses, "Speak to the rock, and water will come out." But Moses was exhausted and angry. He had borne the weight of these people for decades, and in one unguarded moment, instead of speaking to the rock, he struck it, twice, with fury. Water still came out. God still provided, but God said to Moses, Because you did not trust me enough to honor me as holy before the people, you will not bring this congregation into the land I have given them." He would see the land. God allowed him to stand on the peak of Mount Nebo and look out over the promised land, from the Jordan Valley to Jericho to the distant sea. He saw everything he had spent 40 years working toward. But he did not enter. He died there on that mountain, alone with God. And the text says, no one knows where his grave is to this day. The most important human leader in Israel's history had no monument, no tomb, no memorial, just the faithfulness of a life laid down. He had observed what God could do with nobody for the last 40 years and had silently disappeared. So why could God work through Moses in the way that he did? Numbers chapter 12 verse 3 answers it plainly. Now Moses was a very humble man, more humble than anyone else on the face of the earth. Humility is lowering ourselves before God and people. Humility is not the absence of courage. Humility is the presence of an accurate assessment of oneself before God. It is the recognition that every gift, every word, every moment of strength comes from somewhere beyond ourselves. Moses learned that lesson for 40 years of silence in Midian, watching sheep, being nobody. And that emptiness became the very space into which God poured his power. And here is where the story of Moses becomes not just inspiring, but prophetic. Moses' journey, from somebody to nobody, to the instrument of divine power, is a foreshadowing of the greatest story in history. Philippians 2 verse 6 to 8 says, "Who, being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. And being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross." In John 13 verse 15, after washing their feet, Jesus looked at his disciples and said, "I have set an example for you to follow, as I have done for you." Jesus was not merely somebody. Jesus was God, and he made himself nothing. He laid aside the privileges of deity. He took on human flesh. He washed his disciples' feet with his own hands. He died on a Roman cross between two criminals. The path of Moses, the path of Jesus, and the word of Jesus, this is the path for you. Where are you now? Is there anyone who thinks you are somebody? Is there anyone who thinks you are nobody? Don't forget that God is not looking for the most impressive person, but is looking for the most emptied one, the humble.